A few years ago, people believed that if you worked hard, stayed disciplined, and avoided stupid financial decisions, you'd eventually become financially comfortable. And honestly, a lot of millennials and Gen Z actually did exactly that. They went to school because they were told education was the path to stability. They got jobs, worked overtime, stayed productive, and tried to make smart financial choices. Some avoided partying, some skipped vacations. Others started saving money the moment they got their first paycheck. A lot of them even learned about investing, budgeting, and side hustles. And yet, despite doing everything they were told to do, millions of people still feel financially stuck. Not broke enough to completely panic, but not secure enough to relax either. They check their bank account before buying simple things. They feel guilty spending money even after working hard all month. Their salary increases, but somehow their stress increases too. And eventually, a really frustrating question starts appearing in their mind. If I'm doing everything right, why does it still feel impossible to get ahead? My name is Demas, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. If you're someone who feels stuck financially, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Now look, this video is not about blaming rich people, and it's definitely not another stop buying coffee lecture either. Because honestly, most people already know the basics of personal finance. Spend less than you earn, save consistently, avoid unnecessary debt, invest for the long term. The problem is, those ideas are incomplete. Because if financial success were really that simple, millions of hardworking people wouldn't still feel trapped despite doing everything correctly. Here's what most people don't realize. The financial game changed dramatically over the last few decades, but the advice people repeat online often stayed the same. Previous generations lived in a world where wages could realistically keep up with housing, education, and everyday expenses. Today, that gap has become much larger, so people blame themselves for struggling, when in reality they're trying to win a game that became far more expensive, competitive, and psychologically exhausting than before. Let's start with something uncomfortable. Wages have not kept up with the cost of living. And that's not just some emotional opinion people complain about online. The data actually supports it. According to reports from the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the cost of housing, healthcare, education, and even groceries has risen dramatically over the past few decades, while wage growth has moved much slower. Now, you might be thinking, people have always struggled financially. And that's true. Every generation had financial challenges. But the math today is fundamentally different. Imagine someone in the 1980s earning around $40,000 a year. Back then, a typical house might cost roughly 2 to 3 times their annual salary. Today, someone earning $60,000 or even $70,000 may still struggle to buy a home costing $500,000 or more. That ratio completely changed. And this matters because wealth is rarely built from income alone. Real wealth usually comes from owning assets that increase in value over time. But when assets become dramatically more expensive relative to income, people fall behind even while working harder than ever before. Now let's talk about one of the biggest financial traps almost nobody notices while it's happening. Lifestyle inflation. This is the silent reason why so many people earn more money every year, but still feel financially stuck. Here's how it usually happens. Someone gets a raise at work, starts earning more, and naturally feels like they finally deserve a better lifestyle. So they move into a nicer apartment. They upgrade their phone. They finance a newer car. They start ordering food more often because they're busy and tired. Small upgrades slowly become normal habits. And individually, none of those decisions seem terrible. That's what makes lifestyle inflation so dangerous, because the spending increases gradually enough that people barely notice it. Here's a simple example. Imagine someone earning $4,000 a month after taxes. After paying rent, transportation, food, subscriptions, and debt payments, they manage to save around $500 monthly. Then they get promoted and start earning $5,500. Sounds amazing, right? But suddenly the apartment gets upgraded, the car payment increases, weekend spending grows, and convenience becomes a daily habit. And somehow, they're still only saving $500. Same stress, same anxiety, different income. Here's the thing. Financial freedom is not created by income alone. It's created by the gap between what you earn and what you spend. This is where psychology becomes incredibly important, because most money decisions are not actually logical. They're emotional. People love to believe they make rational financial choices, but behavioral psychology shows the opposite. Humans naturally prioritize short-term comfort over long-term rewards. That's why buying something today feels emotionally satisfying, while investing for retirement feels distant and abstract. Your brain sees immediate pleasure as real. Future wealth feels invisible, and modern companies understand this perfectly. That's why spending money today has become easier than at any point in human history. One-click checkout. Buy now, pay later. Same-day delivery. Subscription services for everything imaginable. The easier spending becomes, the harder discipline becomes. Now combine that with social media. People constantly see influencers showing luxury apartments, expensive vacations, designer clothes, and successful lifestyles online every single day. Even if you logically know most of it is curated or exaggerated, emotionally, it still affects you. Because comparison quietly changes your definition of success. Someone earning decent money suddenly feels poor simply because they're comparing their real life to someone else's highlight reel. And dissatisfied people often spend emotionally to temporarily feel better. That's the dangerous cycle most people never notice. Now let's talk about one of the biggest financial questions younger generations struggle with today. Should I invest my money or focus on paying off debt first? And honestly, the answer is far more complicated than most finance influencers make it sound online, because not all debt is equally dangerous. For example, high-interest credit card debt can quietly destroy your finances faster than almost anything else. If you're paying 20% or even 25% interest every year, that debt is growing incredibly fast in the background. In situations like that, aggressively paying it off usually makes mathematical sense. But low-interest debt can be different. Imagine someone with a student loan charging 4% interest while long-term stock market investments historically average around 8% to 10% returns over time. Mathematically, investing could potentially create more wealth in the long run than paying off the loan early. But here's where it gets interesting. Personal finance is not purely mathematical. It's psychological too. Some people can invest confidently while carrying manageable debt. Others feel constant anxiety knowing they owe money every month. And if debt keeps you stressed, overwhelmed, or emotionally exhausted, eliminating it may improve your overall financial behavior far more than chasing slightly better returns ever could. This is where things become really interesting. Wealthy people often understand one simple principle that average earners completely underestimate. Time matters more than intensity. Most people think building wealth requires something dramatic. A massive salary increase, a lucky crypto investment, a viral business idea, some huge breakthrough that suddenly changes everything overnight. But in reality, long-term wealth is usually built through boring consistency. And honestly, that's why most people ignore it, because slow progress doesn't feel exciting. Let's use a simple example. Imagine someone invests just $500 every month starting at age 25. They consistently put money into broad index funds and leave it untouched for decades. At first, the progress looks painfully small. After a year, the account barely seems life-changing. Even after several years, it may still feel insignificant. But then compound growth starts accelerating. The returns begin generating their own returns. And over enough time, that small monthly investment can eventually grow into well over $1 million. Not because the person was a genius, not because they got lucky, but because they understood something most people don't. Consistency multiplied by time becomes incredibly powerful. So what should you actually do if you feel financially stuck right now? First, start tracking your cash flow honestly. Not emotionally, not approximately, actually know where your money goes every single month. Because one of the biggest financial mistakes people make is underestimating small recurring expenses. A few subscriptions here, food delivery there, random impulse purchases during stressful weeks. Over time, those habits quietly consume thousands of dollars. Second, focus on increasing your income strategically. Look, frugality alone is much harder today than it was decades ago. Cutting expenses helps, but there's a limit to how much you can save. Income growth matters more than ever before. That could mean learning higher income skills, negotiating your salary, building side income, freelancing, creating digital products, or starting a small business online. Third, invest consistently, even if the amount feels small at first. Most people delay investing because they think small amounts won't matter. But consistency matters more than intensity. Small investments repeated over many years can become surprisingly powerful because of compound growth. And finally, stop using other people's lifestyles as your financial benchmark. Modern culture pressures people to look wealthy instead of actually becoming wealthy. And those are two completely different things. Look, the economy today is harder in many ways, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone. Housing is more expensive, competition is higher, and financial pressure feels constant for a lot of people. So if you've been feeling frustrated, exhausted, or financially stuck, you're not imagining it. But here's the important part. Building wealth is still possible. It just requires a completely different mindset than what most people were taught growing up. You need patience in a world addicted to instant gratification. You need discipline in a culture constantly encouraging consumption. And most importantly, you need long-term thinking while everyone else is chasing short-term validation. Because real wealth building is usually boring at first. There are no dramatic breakthroughs, no overnight success, no life-changing moment that suddenly fixes everything. Instead, it's small, smart decisions repeated consistently for years. Investing regularly, avoiding destructive debt, learning valuable skills, increasing income slowly, spending intentionally instead of emotionally. And at first, the progress feels invisible. But eventually, those decisions begin to compound. That's the part most people quit before experiencing. So if you feel behind right now, remember this. Your financial future is not determined by where you start. It's determined by the habits and decisions you repeat over time.